Hey, I wanted to take you, and we've talked a lot about this in different videos and mentioned it, but let's take a look at the UMI parts that I've put on and am going to put on in this video from UMI. So this did get a full UMI front suspension. I will put the kits that I used in the links and everything in the description so you have it too. But let's start off with the Camber. This is their, what I'll call their standard Camber, not the race one. But all in all, installation went pretty smooth. The directions were pretty good. The only issues I ran into were, let me go see if I can take you up there. I'll give you an example here where the Camber bolts into the existing holes, okay? I used I tried soaking them in PB Blaster. I did end up using a torque, my big Milwaukee torque gun to get them out. And in doing so, I did wreck those threads to some degree, which you'd expect. So I did have to go through really all of them. And a lot of these are blind, meaning you can't get to the back. But I was able to get a tap in there to both clean and retap any damaged threads. Everything did torque up. It was a little puckering, if you get what I mean. Because if you do wreck something, you're not gonna get to those nuts without cutting an access hole. But all in all, that went pretty smooth. This is a bolt-in kit. I did also get, now there's a whole bunch of people that'll probably say you should have spent the money and went with coilovers. Yeah, you're probably right, but this was already enough money on a car that probably at the end of the day is barely going to be worth what I have into it. But these are the UMI A-arms with the 1.5 to 2 inch lowering springs, obviously on both sides. Now, I mentioned the Baer Brakes before. I'll put this link in the description, but the Baer Brakes this kit came with the spindle, so that was nice. So once I had the A-arms and everything on, I was able to put the spindle on, get the brakes hung. And I have those, we already looked at that brake fitting before. But you might notice the yellow, I am running Coney struts and shocks on this. I'll put those in the list, in the description too, in the parts list. They are semi-adjustable, so they're not like the fancy dual adjustable struts that you can get. But I'm hoping it rides well enough where I don't have to spend months on end tweaking it, the suspension that is. So that's the Camber from UMI. I did at the same time I ordered the kit, I ordered the LS style engine mounts that they make for this, knowing that most people, it's a common swap. And that's where you saw in the last video, I mated those up to that set of Holley Blackheart serviceable clamshells, which again, fit really nicely in here. Both sides had no issue. If we come back to the front, I did also get, now if you have a Trans Am GTA, when I actually compared these to the old one, if you had a GTA, it did come with a beef and a WS6. I think they had the GTAs have to be WS6. Don't quote me on that. But that sway bar actually was about the same thickness, and I would argue that there isn't probably too much difference with the UMI. But since UMI did help me out on pricing by supporting this project, I did just opt to say, hey, give me the whole thing. So I do have that front sway bar, and then you can see I also got, oh, it's eluding me. One too many shots to the head. You know, the support bar for the front. Post it in the comments if you can help my brain. But, so all that's, this is actually all just loosely bolted in. I don't want to say loosely, I guess snugged. I was really waiting for this weight, like the engine, to get in the car, so we'll come back up then here, and we'll get now that this should be sitting roughly with the weight, we'll go through and tighten these back up. I did grease and lube all those so we shouldn't end up with any squeaks. And then kind of rounding it out up front, I got a Pro Forged front steering kit because everything that was on this car was rusty and bent, and it just wasn't great. I do not have the bump steer piece. I'm gonna see how this rides first. But I do have all this loosely hooked up and ready. It still needs an alignment, as you'd expect. I have quite the, I don't know, maybe you can see it in the tire pitch. It might be hard to see, but she's sitting a little not good yet. But we'll adjust that a little bit here as we go on in this project. So that's the front end. Like I said, it's all UMI up front. And we talked about, if you watched the last video, pretty much then from the transmission back, you can kind of see it here, I decided to go QA1. Just to give you a real world comparison in 2025, if I wanted to go a full QA1, right? Everything I have from UMI, but in QA1, I'd have paid about $1,000 more. And I decided it was worth me spending that $1,000 on other places on the car. And what drove me to QA1 was the fact that they have this transmission crossmember. Now, I'm not saying I'm not gonna have to come in here with a grinder yet and clearance some of this for exhaust. But it does look like they tried to keep it pretty much up and out of the way of things. Very happy with both the UMI and the QA1 hardware so far. But this is their crossmember for a 4L80. And it lined, I mean, I was right pretty much at the back of the adjustments, but it fit without much hassle, which was great. And then it became one of those, well, if there's a setup for their torque arm, I'll just, spend a little bit extra on the adjustable torque arm. That way, hopefully I'm not gonna run into any big, major pinion angle adjustments. Hopefully I can adjust a lot of that out of the system. So what we're working on next, this is gonna take some prep and a little welding, is, again, I had a decision to make. I decided that I would go with the Welding subframe connectors. So, see if I can give you a better shot here. These are the UMI subframe connectors. They're fairly heavy. These are Welding except for the bolt that goes around the trailing arm cradle, if you want to call it that. And the reason I went with these was because it had this, and this is, it's 30 years old. They've been jacked up on, they've been bent. In fact, I can already see I have to hammer this one maybe a little bit straight yet. But this is gonna be a nice reinforcement for that trailing arm. And I gotta read the directions here. Because then you have to grind off some paint. It shows you how big of a weld to put in where. So we're gonna mark all that out and get all that prepped, and then we will put these subframe connectors in, and then we'll go on to the fuel system. But I wanted to get all of that welding kind of out of the way, obviously, first, before I have nice, expensive PTFE fuel lines in here and I'm hitting them with hot sparks and whatnot. So that's kind of next on my list. Get you set up, and we got to get marking and get grinding. Okay, so underneath here again now, we've gotten the old bolts out. We got the new longer bolt that comes with the kit in there, and just push through now. That's going to be our pivot point. And all we're doing right now is kind of heaving this up. And according to the paperwork, the directions here, there's a weld point at the end of that tip. I'm kind of just outlining it all with a white paint marker right there too. And that's where we're gonna have to come back and grind that down to bare steel. Make sure we get a nice weld in here. And yes, I know I'm gonna have to touch up a lot of the paint under here, but I thought it was more important to get fresh paint in all the nooks and crannies, and I will deal with touch up afterwards. I thought that was the best way to go about it. Maybe not, but, and for those wondering about my support bar, that you might have seen in another video. It does certainly clear that. I don't know how well you can see that in there. So that might be another point that I decided to throw some weld in. And then after all that, there is a spot back here. Once you have the front welded in, so I'll have to go and mark this as well. Maybe get some lights under here. But at the back of this bracket, on both sides, a couple beads. So that's the plan. Let me finish getting this marked out and we'll get to grinding. Back out here in the daylight, this is what we come up with. So this would be the front. So you can see, obviously, I'm gonna be welding underneath. So I'm gonna take off this edge, a little bit on the front, as well as the other post or tab there. Do the same thing, grind up the top. Then on the back, I decided I'm gonna add an extra bead right here in the back, so I have that marked out. And if I turn this over one more time, you can see that's kind of where they want the weld to go on the back, where the trailing arms are. And I have that one marked out a little bit as well. They want you to, so big things are, they want you to start with the driver's side and to make sure that the suspension is loaded. You don't want this sitting on jack stands. I can kind of get away with it here just because I have a lift. But if you don't, they kind of really want you to drive up on ramps and put jack stands. They're just making sure, and if you do that, then you have to jack up the rear end to make sure your A-arms in the back are parallel to the ground. So there's some things to watch out for. This is one of the reasons I had to do this now, because I had to make sure I had enough weight in the vehicle so that when I weld this in, like, that's it, right? The only way you're adjusting it after that is with cutting welds and regrinding, or grinding welds and rewelding, all that. So that's where we're at here. Time to get the flap disc out, do a little bit of paint removal. We got some welding to do. Let's go. I'm gonna get the welder out of its hiding spot, unbury a mess here. Let's get the welder out. We'll go through that. Then we'll get some tacks laid down. First, I got a clear path. It's like I'm restoring a car or something. Stuff everywhere. Are we still connected? Probably. Yep. That's good for it. Oh boy. Oh. There we go. Well. Let's see, we pull that up, put that back. Oh, it's my toe. I got my shop Crocs on. It's just what I walked out of the house with. It's really what you want for welding. That way when the sparks fall, you can feel it all the way to your toes. Okay. Welding jackets. Stuff and things. Holy smokes. Apparently I haven't cleaned up in a while. All right, let's go take a look at this sucker. So this is my welding setup here. Real quick fact, I have probably owned almost every welder Miller has made from the back in the days when they bought Powcon for their inverter technology, all the way up to the Miller-Matic 252. Let's just say I even owned a couple 3-phase robotic welding power supplies and a few other things. Used to buy and resell, fix them up. After many years of that, I experimented with Chinese welders like Yes Welder, and I even had a Hobart multi-handler for a little bit. I can't even remember, maybe one more off-brand Chinese welder. Here I am, back to my Miller. I picked this one up for an absolute song. I couldn't turn it down. Long story behind that, but this is a Multimatic 235. It's been so long, I didn't even know what I got in here. I think I have 023 wire. Sure looks like it. This is probably still set up from when I was doing all the body work on the car. So I'm just running a standard Miller MIG gun with the 2-3 liner in it, if that's the case. This is, what is this one? Yeah, this is the Multimatic. So this one has a bunch of the auto settings that actually work really well. Basically what it does is it's looking at voltage, current, resistance, and it's trying to make adjustments on the fly to give you the best weld possible. This one happens to do a whole bunch of things. One thing I might try when we get to the exhaust is the TIG on this unit. I haven't tried that yet, but it's been a pretty good rig so far. I really like it. Another neat fact on this one is it does give you 2 different gas ports, so you don't have to mess around with whether you're using TIG or MIG or whatever the case might be. And then for your TIG gun, it gives you that gas port, obviously through a valve out on the front. But we'll get to that when we get into the exhaust. For now, we got to lay down a couple beads, at least on the driver's side. So here are the settings we're going to start at, knowing that some of the steel on that subframe connector is fairly thick, and we're welding it to, I'll say, metal that's half as thick or significantly thinner in some spots. So we're going to use the auto set feature just to give her a go here. We'll use 1/8 of an inch, even though we're probably 1/4 inch steel. But we're at 024 wire, so I'm going to do a couple thinner passes, try to get a nice root in there, and then I think we'll crank this up a little bit and we'll weld from our subframe connector into our root and then up a little bit very quickly so we don't burn through it onto the subframe of the car. That's kind of my thought process here. We'll see how that pans out. All right, here we go. Let's burn a hole. Now we're just gonna sit and chase for 6 hours. Perfect. Perfect. Let's see here. Okay. You know what? I've learned this lesson. Have you guys ever done that? You've learned a lesson where you're like, you just get in the zone and you're like, yeah, I can weld with these gloves on, then you burn holes in your hands for the next 6 weeks. Or you can actually just put on real welding gloves. Same with my sweatshirt. Why would we ruin a nice sweatshirt when I have these welding jackets? It's just sometimes you just get in your zone. Ugh. It's a good spot for that. Sure. Can't miss me in this jacket. Pete sakes. I just want to get welding. All right, that was entertaining. I'll bring you in here. You can kind of see what we got going on. So I wanted to get the rear tacked in place, so I don't want to dump a bunch of heat into it and ruin this poly bushing. I'll probably clean that up now that I have it out, but the poly bushing in this trailing arm. So didn't get hot enough to do that, but I'm gonna take that down. We'll get all that welded up. Now I know at least my bolt will go through. I'll probably put the bolt in there just to keep those holes aligned for good measure. But I just wanted to make sure that everything would go together, because you're not getting a drill bit in there very easily to waller that out. And likewise, I probably didn't grind enough paint off some of that, but we got some tacks started in there. I have a little gap here from where someone tried to jack it up underneath here at one point, or ran something over. So we'll fill all that in. And yeah, crack a door open so we're not dying of exhaust inhalation from the smoke and the paint. And we'll get to this. I don't know if you can tell, but she is smoky in here, and that's the good stuff. So that's probably some leftover galvanizing. That's definitely paint primer, epoxy primer. It's everything you want to breathe in, really. It's good for the lungs. But we can take a look at some of my welds here. Not pretty, it's just gotta work. I didn't feel like it's easier, like I said, if you don't have to jack the carb, if you have a lift. And I don't have an adjustable tip on my MIG gun, so the angle is what it is. So my welds are what they are. But we got, it's a nice one actually. Where are you? There you are. They're definitely solid. They're not gonna go anywhere. Pretty confident in all of that. This one is probably the biggest load bearing, load carrying. Couple passes on that just because it's such a thick piece of metal. And then to make this more challenging, if you're going to attempt this, is on these F bodies. See the seam here? Well, those are just two pieces of metal that are spot welded, and then they have seam sealer in between that, or some type of metal bonding adhesive. So, you know, that all burns off. So we'll clean all these up here. Scrape at this point. Gonna have to scrape off all the loose stuff. Let it cool down, and then once we have all the loose stuff scraped away, we'll come over this with some seam sealer. It's always a good idea. I got some seam sealer, I'll show you that. And then we'll just spritz it with some Rust-Oleum paint and some primer and some paint, since remember that's what basically all this is just a Rust-Oleum gloss enamel that we hardened and put into a spray gun. Making things like this real easy to touch up. So again, this is what I'm using for do I have any left? I was gonna say this is what I'm using for a seam sealer. I might not have any. Oh, I do. This is Evercoat brushable seam sealer. It's what I use on a lot of the car. Things where I wanted more of a rigid seal, I guess you could say, I did use by this brand Polymix. They also have a 2-part seam sealer that works really well. But I think that's it for the driver's side. I'm gonna, off camera, I'm gonna rinse and repeat on the passenger side. You don't have to see that again. And we'll come back when we're ready to touch this baby up. let's get welding tank shut off. Get the welding, the welder shut off. Clean up a little bit here, but let's take you under right away. Passenger side gave me a little heartache. At some point, wait, get over there. At some point in time, maybe I will come here now. There, maybe you can see now. There's some pretty, it's hot, I just welded, pretty heavy ridges in here. You can see someone at some point had tried to cut the old one out with a Sawzall. So I took a flap disc in there and smoothed that out, at least the best I could. We'll throw some super lube on there when we put those back in, but generally speaking, it should be riding on that bolt anyway, so I'm not terribly worried about that. So those welded up okay. Work our way to the front. This is where things got a little interesting. Remember, I told you this car has been at least in 3 different wrecks over the years. So I was a little bit off up here. So I ended up taking something called a square washer that I had. I think these were about 1/4 inch. Welded that in to this thinner-ish floor pan here. Probably burnt a little bit of my shit on the inside. Not much you can do about that. But then once I had that square nut welded in, I came in and started welding the actual subframe connector to that square nut. So that's pretty solid. And then this threw me. This cross member, or this other piece that comes across, was supposed to sit like on top of here, but since these are those floorboards that I made, the curvature and the geometries aren't exactly as they were by factory. So I ended up cutting half of the weld in this bend, and I smashed it with my maul to where I can move it a little bit. And I cut off the flange end, and I had to do a bunch of fill welding because I wasn't messing around with trying to do perfect cuts here. So I got that welded in, and then I got this portion tacked in, trying to avoid some, I did burn some of the seam sealer in here between the panels, but there's no other way. There's no way around that. Just, turn the gas up on your welder a little bit. You might take your time a little bit more than usual, but so I got a bunch of stuff to clean up now, to touch up, to prime. And I want to start getting some Rust-Oleum spritzed back on here. So that's going to take a little bit of time, but the subframe connectors are officially in the car. So that wraps up our video for today. We just got done installing the UMI subframe connectors for an 82 to 92 third gen. I think overall it went fairly well considering what's been done to the car. It is so far from a stock vehicle at this point in terms of repairs, the accidents we know it's been in from our work on the car, etc. So that's going to wrap up, like I said, underneath the car. We'll move on to a few other videos, probably non-automotive related, so stay tuned for that if you're interested. If not, we'll catch you next time on Beyond the Manual.